Let's see if we get the others. Ooh, hello, hello. Hi. We'll see if we can get Kate and Zane in here in the next couple minutes.
Miss McClellan,
Yes, sir.
did I tell you what happened on Saturday at Chick-fil-A?
I think so.
All right, so first thing is I got cussed out. This guy got me off the seat, and he came through with it. All right, so if you need to get out, like food and get out quickly in the morning,
Yeah.
don't go to Chick-fil-A
Because
because it's not gonna be quick.
always busy.
Yes, in the morning especially.
Mhm.
He was mad. He cussed me out, and then this next guy shoved his bag of food in my chest and said he gave me the wrong order, but he did not say don't. He said,
Gosh, people are so rude.
yeah, I know. The manager went off on the second guy though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he stormed out of the door and said, "Go back to your car."
It's just so crazy. Like 9 times out of 10, it's not the person's fault that they're actually yelling at.
Exactly. I had just gotten
Like-
off food too, so I went back to the expedite. And yeah,
Yeah. Like I can pass along your concern, huh?
yeah.
What? Okay.
So my mom, she got a twin.
Okay.
And a
Even
family,
better, there's something else though.
that's the twins in the family.
Uh-huh.
So my granny and my mom auntie. So my stepdad, me or my sister or my auntie kids want to have a set of twins.
I have heard that. I don't know enough about science to know, but
Generation, you guys set twins.
oh, really?
Yes.
Would you want twins or would you be upset? Would you want twins or would you be upset? Kind of hurt.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm grateful for whatever God provided me.
It's 11 o'clock.
I'll be concerned with some. The two of you now. I'm expecting one.
Yeah, like particularly if you don't know there's 2 coming, like what an upsetting thing.
Oh, no, no, no. That's I'll be laughing what's come. If they're gonna have two of both.
That's what my best friend has twins in her family. Like her dad is a twin. And so she's worried that she'll have twins, but she's like kind of not worried because she's like, wouldn't it just be easier to like be one and done? And I mean, yeah, but like think about all that crying and all those diapers and yeah, but you always have crying.
And it makes them.
Yep, my boy, the boys, it wasn't girls. Hey, just a place to do it.
My brother-in-law, when he was younger, thought that he wanted 7 kids, and now they don't want any.
Oh, come on. That man had 7 kids. That's all everybody. How many kids you have? 7. Dang, man.
Who is it? Someone I know is one of 10 kids. Who is that? Is it? Oh my God. I think Miss Miller I think she has a lot of siblings. Yes, ma'am.
So sit if
That's
you were
concerning. So,
sit
how many
in
kids you
the
have?
jail for like 25 years. Well, crime that you didn't do.
Yeah.
And then you did like think of like for 23 years and you just found out that you were innocent. Did the government pay you money or?
I don't know. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for that. I think it depends on the case and like if they owe you anything for like pain and suffering or like job you could have been, I don't know. Your life. I don't know. I think you might have to like sue for it. But I don't know. Oh, here comes Cade. No, not yet. Is it good so far? Yeah, I definitely want to. That's right up my alley for sure. No, not yet. I'll watch it at some point. How many seasons does it have? Oh, okay. Oh, it's like on season 6. I don't have peanuts, but I have cashews and almonds. Cashews? Or almonds? That's okay. You can have those. You can have them if you want them. No. Yeah, you take them. I'm fine. You're welcome. All right, we are gonna get started. Let me plug in here. Yeah, Mr. Nelson was like, no salt. It's the best part. All right, we are gonna read chapter 7 today. Correction, we're gonna start chapter 7 today. We won't get all the way through it because it is the longest chapter. I have gone ahead and posted on Canvas the link to the chapter 7 audio, and that's the one that we found on YouTube. That's a guy reading it. But the whole thing is like 53 minutes. So we'll get as far as we can. Chapter 7 is pretty explosive in a lot of ways. No, there's 9 chapters. Yeah, I would say it's, I'm trying to remember like how chapter 7 ends. And I think there's also sort of, yeah, I would say it's the climax. Some other interesting stuff happens after the climax, but if we're looking at the point of no return, it's definitely during this chapter. Let's see, chapter 7. Let me share my screen with you guys. Uh-huh. I saw that. And someone in the comments was like, gay Gatsby. my whole world would be different. The great Gatsby is not even alliterated. The great Gatsby. It'd be awful. Okay. This is on page 120 of the document, and it's on page 120 no matter which way you look at it, so that's nice. Sometimes it'll be a different number, like at the top versus on the actual page. But all right, anybody want to read today? All right, looks like it's gonna be May. I was just looking to see where we left off. Oh yeah. Where we left off last chapter was when Nick went up to Gatsby and was like, hey, you need to like chill out. You're putting too much pressure on Daisy. You can't repeat the past. And he's like, can't repeat the past? Why, of course you can, old sport. And he's like, I'm gonna fix everything the way it was before, and she'll see, she'll understand. I gotta make her understand. And so what he wants, what Gatsby really wants, is for her to go to her husband and say, I never loved you, and I've actually been in love with Gatsby this whole time. You were just a blip on the radar for me. Because if she says that, then they can kind of like wipe out the last 5 years, and it'll be like they were always together, they were always in love. Never mind the fact that they literally haven't spoken in 5 years. Is it realistic? Probably not, but yeah, this chapter is pretty explosive, so I'm excited about it. We'll get as far as we can, and then if we don't make it all the way, which we most likely will not, then you'll just have to listen to or read the rest of it on your own before Thursday. All right. It was when curiosity about Gatsby was at its highest that the lights in his house failed to go on one Saturday night. And as obscurely as it had begun, his career as Trimalchio was over. I'm already pausing. The original name of the Great Gatsby was something like, maybe it was just Trimalchio, and I can never remember, so I'm looking it up. Trimalchio was like a story, okay, of like a very old Roman thing, who is an arrogant former slave who has become quite wealthy by tactics that most would find distasteful. Remind you of anyone? So like the lights don't go on Saturday, so he's like not having a party. He's had a party every Saturday night for, you know, probably a couple of years now. So this one Saturday doesn't happen. Only gradually did I become aware that the automobiles which turned expectantly into his drive stayed for just a minute and then drove sulkily away. Wondering if he were sick, I went over to find out. An unfamiliar butler with a villainous face squinted at me suspiciously from the door. Is Mr. Gatsby sick? Nope. After a pause, he added, sir, in a dilatory, grudging way. I hadn't seen him around and I was rather worried. Tell him Mr. Caraway came over. Who? He demanded rudely. Caraway. Caraway. All right, I'll tell him. Abruptly, he slammed the door. My Finn informed me that Gatsby had dismissed every servant in his house a week ago and replaced them with half a dozen others who never went into West Egg Village to be bribed by the tradesmen, but ordered moderate supplies over the telephone. The grocery boy reported that the kitchen looked like a pigsty, and his general opinion in the village was that the new people weren't servants at all. So he's gotten rid of all of his servants, which is sort of suspicious. Like, why are you getting rid of everyone who's worked for you and replacing them with all new people? Curious. Next day, Gatsby called me on the phone. Going away? I inquired. No, old sport. I hear you fired all your servants. I wanted somebody who wouldn't gossip. Daisy comes over quite often in the afternoons. So the whole caravansary had fallen in like a card house at the disapproval in her eyes. So why did he fire all his servants? Yeah, he didn't want them talking about Daisy. She's coming over a lot, so I think we can pretty much put it together that yes, they are having an affair. He doesn't want. Good for Daisy. Good for her. But also it says the whole caravansary had fallen in like a card house at the disapproval in her eyes. She was not as impressed with his whole life as he wanted her to be. And so he's like, let's change things then. Like, if she's not impressed, let's basically get rid of it all and start back over. I know. Just be yourself, Gatsby. Just be yourself.
I'm not yourself. You know, you start all your own, all your riches and forth. You're stupid.
Well, he didn't get rid of all of his stuff, but he. I know, it's infuriating, and which also makes me wonder, like, why does Nick like him so much? Like, I feel like we don't even really know Gatsby. The only thing we know about him is that he loves Daisy. That's all that matters for some people. There are some people Wolfsheim wanted to do something for. They're all brothers and sisters. They used to run a small hotel. I see. All of his new servants work for Meyer Wolfsheim, who we know is a criminal. He's a gambler, and he rigged the 1919 World Series. We suspect he's also got worse stuff going on because he's got cufflinks made out of human teeth. So yeah, like essentially, yeah. So all these people who are working for Gatsby now are people he got from Meyer Wolfsheim. So maybe not super above board. He was calling up at Daisy's request. Would I come to lunch at her house tomorrow? Miss Baker would be there. Half an hour later, Daisy herself telephoned and seemed relieved to find that I was coming. Something was up, and yet I couldn't believe that they would choose this occasion for a scene, especially for the rather harrowing scene that Gatsby had outlined in the garden. I mean, like, if everything's going to come to a head now, like, if this is when she's going to sort of like confront Tom and tell him that she's leaving him for Gatsby. He's like, do I need to be there for that? That might be kind of uncomfortable, which is fair. The next day was broiling, almost the last, certainly the warmest of the summer. As my train emerged from the tunnel into sunlight, only the hot whistles of the National Biscuit Company broke the simmering hush at noon. The straw seats of the car hovered on the edge of combustion. The woman next to me perspired delicately for a while into her white shirtwaist, and then as her newspaper dampened under her fingers, lapsed despairingly into deep heat with a desolate cry. Her pocketbook slapped to the floor. "Oh my," she gasped. I picked it up with a weary bend and handed it back to her, holding it at arm's length and by the extreme tip of the corners to indicate that I had no designs upon it, but everyone nearby, including the woman, suspected me just the same. "Hot," said the conductor to familiar faces. "Some weather. Hot, hot, hot. Is it hot enough for you? Is it hot? Is it?" My commutation ticket came back to me with a dark stain from his hand. That anyone should care in this heat, whose flushed lips he kissed, whose head made damp the pajama pocket over his heart. Through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind, carrying the sound of the telephone bell out to Gatsby and me as we waited at the door. "The master's body," roared the butler into the mouthpiece. "I'm sorry, madam, but we can't furnish it. It's far too hot to touch this noon." What he really said was, "Yes, yes, I'll see." He set down the receiver and came toward us, glistening slightly, to take our stiff straw hats. "Madame expects you in the salon," he cried, needlessly indicating the direction. In this heat, every extra gesture was an affront to the common store of life. The room, shadowed well with awnings, was dark and cool. Daisy and Jordan lay upon an enormous couch like silver idols, weighing down their own white dresses against the singing breeze of the fans. This is almost a callback to the first scene where he met them, just like lying out on couches, like trying to keep cool. I like the portrayal of it in the most modern adaptation, and a couple of y'all made comments about that, like with the white flowing curtains coming in and everything, gives the whole thing a very like ethereal feel. We're kind of calling back to that, except this time it's so freaking hot that no one can enjoy anything. No one, I mean, like we all know what that's like because we live in Charleston. Like it just is so bad. You like don't even want anybody to touch you. You're just like, please, like I'm sweating to death. Don't touch me. "We can't move," they said together. Jordan's fingers, powdered white over their tan, rested for a moment in mine. "And Mr. Thomas Buchanan, the athlete?" I inquired. Simultaneously, I heard his voice, gruff, muffled, husky, at the hall telephone. Gatsby stood in the center of the crimson carpet and gazed around with fascinated eyes. Daisy watched him and laughed, her sweet, exciting laugh. A tiny gust of powder rose from her bosom into the air. "The rumor is," whispered Jordan, "that that's Tom's girl on the telephone." We were silent. The voice in the hall rose high with annoyance. "Very well, then I won't sell you the car at all. I'm under no obligations to you at all. And as for your bothering me about it at lunchtime, I won't stand that at all." If you guys will remember, Myrtle is Tom's girlfriend, and she is married to the mechanic, George Wilson. And Tom has been saying that he might sell George Wilson a car, but they couldn't really come to an agreement. So it sounds like he's talking to him on the phone, like he's not going to sell him the car. And he kind of keeps trying to like hold it over George Wilson's head a little bit, which I'm sure he like gets off on the power involved with that. But he's like, "Oh, well, if you're not going to pay me this much, I'm not going to sell you my car." Like he's doing him a favor by selling the car. "Holding down the receiver," said Daisy cynically. "No, he's not," I assured her. "It's a bona fide deal. I happen to know about it." That's right, because he was there before when Tom was talking to the guy about selling him the car. Tom flung open the door, blocked out its space for a moment with his thick body, and hurried into the room. "Mr. Gatsby," he put out his broad, flat hand with well-concealed dislike. "I'm glad to see you, sir. Nick, make us a cold drink," cried Daisy. As he left the room again, she got up and went over to Gatsby and pulled his face down, kissing him on the mouth. "You know I love you," she murmured. All right, that's pretty big. She loves him. And like as soon as her husband's out of the room, she's like trying to make out with him. And we kind of have wondered before, we haven't really seen her side of things too much. Like obviously she was very happy to see her old ex-boyfriend that she had really loved at the time, but we didn't really know until now how invested she was in this whole thing. But she says she loves him. Very important. I don't know. I mean, she waited until Tom was gone to, to say any of that, but Tom's literally like in the next room. And also Tom maybe just got off the phone with his mistress, which she knows about. So that's a good question.
Is it wrong for her to cheat in this situation?
Oh, I think that's a hard question, and one we've probably been over before. Is it wrong for her to cheat in this question or in this situation? Like, is it ever right
Yes.
for her to cheat?
No.
But that's the thing that like we all are like when we first started reading this chapter, Alyssa and I both were kind of like, good for her. But like she's just doing the same thing that Tom's doing. She just doesn't suck as bad as Tom does. Yeah. I don't know. I've known a couple that first the husband cheated and the wife was very upset, but then she cheated. And I was like, well, what right do you have to be upset about it now? Like, I don't just don't be together. If you're both gonna cheat, then like just don't be together.
Or just do it once and then get over it and then get over it.
Yeah.
Like whatever you're gonna do, just don't do it again.
Yeah, like don't just continually have extramarital affairs. Like that's
If all you're gonna do is just have an affair the entire time that you're married, then you shouldn't be married.
you shouldn't be married. Exactly. Agreed. And it's not even the same as I know that like these days we have like open marriages and open relationships and stuff, but people didn't really recognize that back then. And also marriage was so much a status thing as well back then that, it just wouldn't have even been on the table. But also like, even so, they're not like happy with each other. They're not like, oh yeah, go off and do whatever you want to do. Like they're doing it to hurt each other, or at least they don't care that they're hurting each other. You forget there's a lady present, said Jordan. Daisy looked around doubtfully. You kiss Nick too. What a low, vulgar girl. I don't care, cried Daisy and began to clog on the brick fireplace. Then she remembered the heat and sat down guiltily on the couch, just as a freshly laundered nurse leading a little girl came into the room. Here's the kid. We've never seen her before. Blessed precious, she crooned, holding out her arms. Come to your own mother that loves you. The child, relinquished by the nurse, rushed across the room and rooted shyly into her mother's dress. The blessed precious. Did mother get powder on your old yellowy hair? Stand up now and say howdy do. Gatsby and I in turn leaned down and took the small, reluctant hand. Afterward, he kept looking at the child with surprise. I don't think he had ever really believed in its existence before. To be fair, like he has said all this stuff about how he wants Daisy to leave Tom and say she never loved him. He has not even considered the kid for 1 second. It's almost like he doesn't even acknowledge that there is a kid until right now when he meets her.
That means that Daisy doesn't really talk about that.
Yeah, and I don't think that Daisy does talk about her much. She like even with Nick, she was like, oh yeah, you should see the baby. She eats, she cries, whatever. Like,
Do you even like the kid?
I would say no. Like
She's got someone else taking care of the kid like full time.
yeah, like the kid has a nanny or a nurse. And I sort of feel like she's got a kid because that's what you do. You get married and you have kids. And she is trying to live this lifestyle.
I don't know that kid, though. I got to deal with this.
I do too. Her neglectful mother and her abusive father, not abusive towards her that we know of, but like he's, yeah, he's awful. I got dressed before luncheon, said the child, turning eagerly to Daisy. That's because your mother wanted to show you off. Her face bent into the single wrinkle of the small white neck. You dream, you absolute little dream. Yes, admitted the child calmly. Aunt Jordan's got on a white dress too. How do you like mother's friends? Daisy turned her around so that she faced Gatsby. Do you think they're pretty? Where's Daddy? I know, shade. She doesn't look like her father, explained Daisy. She looks like me. She's got my hair and shape of the face. Daisy sat back upon the couch. The nurse took a step forward and held out her hand. Come, Pammy. Goodbye, sweetheart. With a reluctant backward glance, the well-disciplined child held to her nurse's hand and was pulled out the door just as Tom came back, preceding 4 gin rickeys that clicked full of ice. Gatsby took up his drink. They certainly look cool, he said with visible tension. We drank in long, greedy swallows. I read somewhere that the sun's getting hotter every year, said Tom genially. It seems that pretty soon the Earth's going to fall into the sun. Or wait a minute, it's just the opposite. The sun's getting colder every year. Come outside, he suggested to Gatsby. I'd like you to have a look at the place. I went with them out to the veranda. On the green sound, stagnant in the heat, one small sail crawled slowly toward the fresher sea. Gatsby's eyes followed it momentarily. He raised his hand and pointed across the bay. I'm right across from you. So you are. Our eyes lifted over the rosebuds and the hot lawn and the weedy refuse of the dog days along shore. Slowly, the white wings of the boat moved against the blue, cool limit of the sky. Ahead lay the scalloped ocean and the abounding Blessed Isles. There's sport for you, said Tom, nodding. I'd like to be out there with him for about an hour. We had luncheon in the dining room, darkened too against the heat, and drank down nervous gaiety with the cold ale. What do we do with ourselves this afternoon? Cried Daisy. And the day after that, and the next 30 years. Don't be morbid, Jordan said. Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall. But it's so hot, insisted Daisy, on the verge of tears, and everything's so confused. Let's all go to town. Her voice struggled on through the heat, beating against it, molding its senselessness into forms. I've heard of making a garage out of a stable, Tom was saying to Gatsby, but I'm the first man who ever made a stable out of a garage. Who wants to go to town? Demanded Daisy insistently. Gatsby's eyes floated toward her. Ah, she cried, you look so cool. Their eyes met, and they stared together at each other, alone in space. With an effort, she glanced down at the table. You always look so cool, she repeated. She had told him that she loved him, and Tom Buchanan saw. He was astounded. His mouth opened a little, and he looked at Gatsby and then back at Daisy, as if he had just recognized her as someone he knew long ago. So Daisy didn't actually say the words that she loved Gatsby in front of Tom, but the look that they give each other, they're like sitting down the table from each other, and all she says is, you look so cool, you always look so cool. But the way that they're looking at each other, Tom is like, I get it now. I know what's going on. You resemble the advertisement of the man, she went on innocently. You know, the advertisement of the man. All right, broke in Tom quickly. I'm perfectly willing to go to town. Come on, we're all going to town. He got up, his eyes still flashing between Gatsby and his wife. No one moved. Come on, his temper cracked a little. What's the matter anyhow? If we're going to town, let's start. His hand, trembling with his effort at self-control, bore to his lips the last of his glass of ale. Daisy's voice got us to our feet and out onto the blazing gravel drive. Are we just gonna go? She objected. Like this? Aren't we gonna let anyone smoke a cigarette first? Everybody smoked all through lunch. Oh, let's have fun, she begged him. It's too hot to fuss. He didn't answer. Have it your own way, she said. Come on, Jordan. They went upstairs to get ready while we three men stood there shuffling the hot pebbles with our feet. A silver curve of the moon hovered already in the western sky. Gatsby started to speak, changed his mind, but not before Tom wheeled and faced him expectantly. Have you got your stables here? Asked Gatsby with an effort. About a quarter of a mile down the road. Oh, a pause. I don't see the idea of going to town, broke out Tom savagely. Women get these notions in their heads. Shall we take anything to drink? Called Daisy from an upper window. I'll get some whiskey, answered Tom. He went inside. Gatsby turned to me rigidly. I can't say anything in his house, old sport. She's got an indiscreet voice, I remarked. It's full of... I hesitated. Her voice is full of money, he said suddenly. That was it. I'd never understood it before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charm that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the cymbal song of it. High in a white palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl. I love that phrase, first of all. Her voice is full of money. It's just a nice little metaphor. But he has said several times that she has this like melodic, beautiful, like magnetic voice. It just draws your ear to her. And he's like, I could never quite put my finger on it. But what Gatsby says is that her voice is full of money. And suddenly that kind of makes sense. And maybe it makes sense. That's one of the reasons that Gatsby might like her. He's had all this ambition to be successful and to be rich. And then he found the golden girl, the girl who is the one that everybody wants, the one whose voice is full of money. She would be like kind of his crowning achievement. And I don't think that he thinks of it that way, but I think that's possible. It's one of the reasons that he kind of fell for her. Tom came out of the house wrapping a quart bottle in a towel, followed by Daisy and Jordan wearing small, tight hats of metallic cloth and carrying light capes over their arms. Shall we all go in my car? Suggested Gatsby. He felt the hot green leather of the seat. I ought to have left it in the shade. Is it standard shift? Demanded Tom. Yes. Well, you take my coup and let me drive your car to town. The suggestion was distasteful to Gatsby, and I get why. Like, he's got this big fancy car, and this guy he doesn't even like is like, you take my car, I'll take your car. I'm like, no, dude, you're gonna wreck it. Get out of my car. He has like this long cream colored Rolls Royce.
Ooh, that cream color. I hate any color of cream color. That just makes it look dirty.
Oh, well, it's I think sometimes it's described as cream colored and sometimes it's described as yellow. So it's a big flashy car. And we don't really know what Tom has, but just like a little coup. All right. The suggestion was distasteful to Gatsby. I don't think there's much gas, he objected. Plenty of gas, said Tom boisterously. He looked at the gauge. And if it runs out, I can stop at a drugstore. You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays. A pause followed this apparently pointless remark. Daisy looked at Tom frowning in an indefinable expression, at once definitely unfamiliar and vaguely recognizable, as if I had only heard it described in words, passed over Gatsby's face. Come on, Daisy, said Tom, pressing her with his hand toward Gatsby's car. I'll take you in this circus wagon. You have to insult the car as well. He knows it's a nice car. He opened the door, but she moved out from the circle of his arm. You take Nick and Jordan. We'll follow you in the coup. She walked close to Gatsby, touching his coat with her hand. Jordan and Tom and I got into the front seat of Gatsby's car. Tom pushed the unfamiliar gears tentatively, and we shot off into the oppressive heat, leaving them out of sight behind. So, like, Daisy and Gatsby are left alone at this point, and that really wasn't what Tom had in mind, but she kind of finagled it. Did you see that? Demanded Tom. See what? He looked at me keenly, realizing that Jordan and I must have known all along. You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you? He suggested. Perhaps I am, but I have almost a second sight sometimes that tells me what to do. Maybe you don't believe that, but science. He paused. Science. The immediate contingency overtook him, pulled him back from the edge of the theoretical abyss. Oh. Alyssa, you can go to Miss Kokel if you like. I'm glad I set that alarm. I would have forgot. I know. I've made a small investigation of this fellow, he continued. I could have gone deeper if I'd known. Do you mean you've been to a medium? Inquired Jordan humorously. What? Confused, he stared at us as we laughed. A medium? About Gatsby. About Gatsby. No, I haven't. I said I'd been making a small investigation of his past. And you found he was an Oxford man, said Jordan helpfully. An Oxford man? He was incredulous. Like hell he is. He wears a pink suit. Nevertheless, he's an Oxford man. Oxford, New Mexico, snorted Tom contemptuously, or something like that. Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to lunch? Demanded Jordan crossly. Daisy invited him. She knew him before we were married. God knows where. We know where. We were all irritable now with the fading ale, and aware of it, we drove for a while in silence. Then, as Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's faded eyes came into sight down the road, I remembered Gatsby's caution about gasoline. And if you guys will remember, we talked about Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. It's this big billboard for an optometrist, but it's just like a set of eyes, and it's near the gas station where Tom's girlfriend lives with her husband. But it's also kind of symbolic, like, of just people, like even maybe like God or Big Brother or someone just like looking out on all the events that are happening and kind of passing judgment on it. We've got enough to get us to town, said Tom. But there's a garage right here, objected Jordan. I don't want to get stalled in this baking heat. Oh, no worries, no worries. Tom threw on both brakes impatiently, and we slid to an abrupt, dusty stop under Wilson's sign. After a moment, the proprietor emerged from the interior of his establishment and gazed hollow-eyed at the car. "Let's have some gas," cried Tom roughly. "What do you think we stopped for, to admire the view?" Like, why do you have to be so rude, Tom? Just tell him that you need gas. Don't yell at him. "I'm sick," said Wilson without moving. "I've been sick all day." "What's the matter?" "I'm all run down." "Well, shall I help myself?" Tom demanded. "You sounded well enough on the phone." With an effort, Wilson left the shade in support of the doorway and, breathing hard, unscrewed the cap of the tank. In the sunlight, his face was green. "I didn't mean to interrupt your lunch," he said, "but I need money pretty bad, and I was wondering what you were going to do with your old car." "How do you like this one?" inquired Tom. "I bought it last week." Liar! He did not buy this car last week. This is Gatsby's car. "It's a nice yellow one," said Wilson as he strained at the handle. "Like to buy it?" "Big chance," Wilson smiled faintly. "No, but I could make some money on the other." "What do you want money for all of a sudden?" "I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west." "Your wife does?" exclaimed Tom, startled. "She's been talking about it for 10 years. He rested for a moment against the pump, shading his eyes. "And now she's going, whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her away." The coupe flashed by us with a flurry of dust and the flash of a waving hand. So this is some news to Tom too. Like, he's talking to his girlfriend's husband and he says, "I need money because we're going to go away out west. My wife has wanted to, and now she's going to, whether she wants to or not. It'll be good for her." And so it kind of leads us to wonder, like, does he know that his wife is having an affair? Is that why he's trying to take her away? We don't know. He certainly does not know that he's talking to her boyfriend at the moment, but I imagine he'd be upset if he didn't know. Well, yeah, of course. "What do I owe you?"
I'm your husband's ex-girlfriend. Okay?
Yeah, it's a complicated web with all these people, honestly. Like, you've got Tom and Daisy, who are married. She's having a thing with Gatsby. He's having a thing with Myrtle. Myrtle's married to George. Tom's trying to sell George a car. Like, it's a fiasco. "What do I owe you?" Tom demanded harshly. "I just got wised up to something funny the last 2 days," remarked Wilson. "That's why I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about the car." Something funny being my wife is having an affair. "What do I owe you?" $1.20. Man, gas used to be cheap. The relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me, and I had a bad moment there before I realized that so far, his suspicions hadn't alighted on Tom. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. Wilson was so sick that he looked guilty, unforgivably guilty, as if he had just got some poor girl with child. "I'll let you have that car," said Tom. "I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon." That locality was always vaguely disquieting, even in the broad glare of afternoon, and now I turned my head as though I'd been warned of something behind. Over the ash heaps, the giant eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg kept their vigil, but I perceived, after a moment, that other eyes were regarding us with peculiar intensity from less than 20 feet away. In one of the windows over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. So engrossed was she that she had no consciousness of being observed, and one emotion after another crept into her face like objects into a slowly developing picture. Her expression was curiously familiar. It was an expression I had often seen on women's faces, but on Myrtle Wilson's face it seemed purposeless and inexplicable until I realized that her eyes, wide with jealous terror, were fixed not on Tom, but on Jordan Baker, whom she took to be his wife, which makes some sense. Like, Tom's traveling through town with this girl. She just kind of thinks, oh, that's probably his wife, and is just like watching them from out of her window. We know that it's not his wife, but she's never seen Daisy, so she's just kind of trying to put two and two together. There is no confusion like the confusion of a simple mind. And as we drove away, Tom was feeling the hot whips of panic. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago, secure and inviolate, were slipping precipitately from his control. Instinct made him step on the accelerator with the double purpose of overtaking Daisy and leaving Wilson behind. and we sped along toward Astoria at 50 miles an hour until, among the spidery girders of the elevated, we came in sight of the easygoing blue coupe. I think that line is really smart. His wife and his mistress were slipping precipitately from his control. It is all about control for Tom. And he's got both a wife and a mistress, but his wife has said or indicated that she's in love with somebody else, and his mistress might be about to leave town. And he just feels his hold on it all kind of slipping. He's been so cocky the whole time and just kind of like, oh, I don't really even care if Daisy knows that I'm cheating on her. But like, he has been playing so fast and loose with the rules of how you're supposed to be when you're married, and just like being an awful guy. And now he's starting to realize like, uh-oh, maybe I don't have total control on this. And like, I can't let them both get away. Those big movies around 50th Street are cool, suggested Jordan. I love New York on summer afternoons when everyone's away. There's something very sensuous about it. Overripe, as if all sorts of funny fruits were going to fall into your hands. The word sensuous had the effect of further disquieting Tom, but before he could invent a protest, the coupe came to a stop, and Daisy signaled us to draw up alongside. Where are we going? She cried. How about the movies? It's so hot, she complained. You go. We'll ride around and meet you after. With an effort, her wit rose faintly. We'll meet you on some corner. I'll be the man smoking 2 cigarettes. We can't argue about it here, said Tom impatiently, as a truck gave out a cursing whistle behind us. You follow me to the south side of Central Park in front of the plaza. Several times he turned his head and looked back for their car, and if the traffic delayed them, he slowed up until they came into sight. I think he was afraid they would dart down a side street and out of his life forever. But they didn't, and we all took the less explicable step of engaging the parlor of a suite in the Plaza Hotel. Which, like, if they're just going to go hang out in a hotel room all day, why not just stay home? It's very silly. The prolonged and tumultuous argument that ended by herding us into that room eludes me, though I have a sharp physical memory that in the course of it, my underwear kept climbing like a damp snake around my legs, and intermittent beads of sweat raced cool across my back. That is a hot day. That's gross. The notion originated with Daisy's suggestion that we hire 5 bathrooms and take cold baths, and then assumed more tangible form as a place to have a mint julep. Each of us said over and over that it was a crazy idea. We all talked at once to a baffled clerk and thought or pretended to think that we were being very funny. The room was large and stifling, and though it was already 4 o'clock, opening the windows admitted only a gust of hot shrubbery from the park. Daisy went to the mirror and stood with her back to us, fixing her hair. It's a swell suite, whispered Jordan respectfully, and everyone laughed. Open another window, commanded Daisy without turning around. There aren't any more. Well, we better telephone for an axe. The thing to do is to forget about the heat, said Tom impatiently. You make it 10 times worse by crabbing about it. He unrolled the bottle of whiskey from the towel and put it on the table. Why not let her alone, old sport, remarked Gatsby. You're the one that wanted to come to town. Ooh, okay. There was a moment of silence. The telephone book slipped from its nail and splashed to the floor, whereupon Jordan whispered, excuse me, but this time no one laughed. I'll pick it up, I offered. I've got it. Gatsby examined the parted string, muttered, in an interesting way, and tossed the book on a chair. That's a great expression of yours, isn't it? Said Tom sharply. What is? All this old sport business. Where'd you pick that up? Now, see here, Tom, said Daisy, turning around from the mirror. If you're going to make personal remarks, I won't stay here a minute. Call up and order some ice for the mint julep. As Tom took up the receiver, the compressed heat exploded into sound, and we were listening to the portentous chords of Mendelssohn's Wedding March from the ballroom below. Imagine marrying anybody in this heat, cried Jordan dismally. Still, I was married in the middle of June, Daisy remembered. Louisville in June. Somebody fainted. Who was it fainted, Tom? Biloxi, he answered shortly. A man named Biloxi, Blocks Biloxi, and he made boxes. That's a fact, and he was from Biloxi, Tennessee. They carried him into my house, appended Jordan, because we lived just 2 doors from the church, and he stayed 3 weeks until Daddy told him he had to get out. The day after he left, Daddy died. After a moment, she added, as if she might have sounded irreverent, there wasn't any connection. I used to know a Bill Biloxi from Memphis, I remarked. That was his cousin. I knew his whole family history before he left. He gave me an aluminum putter that I use today. The music had died down as the ceremony began, and now a long cheer floated in at the window, followed by intermittent cries of, yeah, 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 and finally by a burst of jazz as the dancing began. We're getting old, said Daisy. If we were young, I'd rise and dance. Remember Biloxi, Jordan warned her. Where'd you know him, Tom? Biloxi? He concentrated with an effort. I didn't know him. He was a friend of Daisy's. He was not, she denied. I'd never seen him before. He came down in the private car. Well, he said he knew you. He said he was raised in Louisville. Asa Bird brought him around at the last minute and asked if we had room for him. Jordan smiled. He was probably bumming his way home. He told me he was president of your class at Yale. Tom and I looked at each other blankly. Biloxi? First place, we didn't have any president. Gatsby's foot beat a short, restless tattoo, and Tom eyed him suddenly. By the way, Mr. Gatsby, I understand you're an Oxford man. Not exactly. Oh, yes, I understand you went to Oxford. Yes, I went there. A pause, then Tom's voice, incredulous and insulting. You must have gone there about the time Biloxi went to New Haven. Another pause. A waiter knocked and came in with crushed mint and ice, but the silence was unbroken by his thank you and the soft closing of the door. This tremendous detail was to be cleared up at last. I told you I went there, said Gatsby. I heard you, but I'd like to know when. It was in 1919. I only stayed 5 months. That's why I can't really call myself an Oxford man. Tom glanced around to see if we mirrored his unbelief, but we were all looking at Gatsby. It was an opportunity they gave to some of the officers after the armistice, he continued. We could go to any of the universities in England or France. I wanted to get up and slap him on the back. I had one of those renewals of complete faith in him that I'd experienced before. And what Nick means by that is like all these times that he has doubted Gatsby, he always tends to like pull it out and prove that there's some grain of truth behind all of these things. And even though claiming that you're an Oxford man sort of indicates that you graduated from there or went there for a long time. He never said that he graduated from there. He says, I don't even really call myself an Oxford man, but I did go there, and he explains it. And Nick's like, yes, I wanted to believe you. And now you have given me what I need so that I can believe you. He's so he's such a cheerleader for Gatsby. He wants to believe him. He wants Gatsby to be a great and honest person. So like any credit he can give him, he will. Daisy rose, smiling faintly, and went to the table. Open the whiskey, Tom, she ordered, and I'll make you a mint julep. Then you won't seem so stupid to yourself. Look at the mint. Wait a minute, snapped Tom. I want to ask Gatsby one more question. Go on, said Gatsby politely. What kind of a row are you trying to cause in my house anyhow? They were out in the open at last, and Gatsby was content. He isn't causing a row. Daisy looked desperately from one to the other. You're causing a row. Please have a little self-control. Self-control, repeated Tom incredulously. I suppose the latest thing is to sit back and let Mr. Nobody from Nowhere make love to your wife. Well, if that's the idea, you can count me out. Nowadays, people begin by sneering at family life and family institutions, and next thing they'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. Heaven forbid. I know. I'm gonna try to get through the last paragraph on this page. Flushed with his impassioned gibberish, he saw himself standing alone on the last barrier of civilization. We're all white here, murmured Jordan. I know I'm not very popular. I don't give big parties. I suppose you've got to make your house into a pigsty in order to have any friends in the modern world. Angry as I was, as we all were, I was tempted to laugh whenever he opened his mouth. The transition from libertine to prig was so complete. I've got something to tell you, old sport, began Gatsby, but Daisy guessed at his intention. Please don't, she interrupted helplessly. Please, let's all go home. Why don't we all go home? That's a good idea. I got up. Come on, Tom. Nobody wants a drink. I want to know what Mr. Gatsby has to tell me. Your wife doesn't love you, said Gatsby. She's never loved you. She loves me. You must be crazy, exclaimed Tom automatically. Gatsby sprang to his feet, vivid with excitement. She never loved you, do you hear? He cried. She only married you because I was poor and she was tired of waiting for me. It was a terrible mistake, but in her heart, she never loved anyone except me. And we've got to end there because we're going to have to go to lunch in 1 minute. Things are really picking up here. I hate to leave it right here, in fact, but Just make sure that you guys read the rest of this chapter before Thursday, and we'll talk about it then. So I will see y'all tomorrow.
Bye.